Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi. Zevachim Daf Zayin. We begin 10 lines off the top of the Amud. Back to the halacha and the Mishnah. A zevach, a carbon which was nishchat. Shaloi lishma, with the wrong intention. The carbon is still kosher, but it doesn't really count for its owner. Here comes an interesting case. Itzma we have learned. We have a karban toida that a fellow brings as an expression of thanksgiving to Hashem for saving him from a precarious situation. So we have Ruvain, who's bringing a karban toida, and Shimon as well, with his karban toida. The Kohen approaches Ruvain's karban toida thinking it's Shimon's karban toida. Now he's not trying to switch the owner on it. It's not really called Shinui Bailim, because he's not misdesignating the owner. He's simply thinking this is the other karban. Instead of being Ruvain's carbon, he's thinking it's Shimon's carbon. So the question is that considered shinui? Is that considered a mislabeling of the carbon? After all, he's still thinking on the toida track, but the thing is, he's thinking the wrong toida. He's thinking that this is Shimon's toida, really it's Ruvain's. What happens? Itma we have learned, toida. Sheshchata l'shem toida's chaver. The Kohen shechted Ruvain's toida, thinking it's Shimon's toida. Rabba Amar, kshera, 100% fine. It's not deficient at all. It not only is it kosher, it's oila lebalim l'shem chayva. It counts to the owner. It's credited to his account, because after all, he didn't label anything. It was a toida, and he was thinking toida, so it's considered a properly processed carbon. Rav Chisda Amar Psula, he says no. This switch is considered shinui kodesh. He mislabeled the carbon, because instead of thinking Ruvain's carbon, he was intending on doing Shimon's carbon. That's called shinui kodesh. In which case, the carbon itself is of course still kosher, but it's not going to count for its owner. And the Gemara explains the reasons behind the machlekes. Rabba Amar, he says it's kshera. After all, toida l'shem toida nishchata. He did the toida for the sake of toida. Who cares if he had this fellow's toida in mind or the other toida in mind? Rav Chisda Amar, no, pesula, it's deficient. L'shem shlamim didei nishchata be'inan. He says you have to have in mind the correct karban shlamim or the correct karban toida. Amar Rabba, how do I know that in fact it's not a problem when he switches in this type of setting? The Sani we have a brace. Upsar zevach toida shlamov b'yoyim hakriva yezivchay v'goymer. So the pasuk calls the toida shlamov, relates to the owner. It's his toida shlamov. Abachon Amar Shem Relezer. It's coming to teach us bala lamid toida sheshchat l'shem shlamim kshera. A toida and a shlamim, they're interchangeable, because really a toida is a subset of a shlamim, right? Shlamim is sort of the father category, under which comes the shlamim variety, right? So if he did the toida thinking it's a shlamim, it's okay. It's not really considered a switch of labeling. But in the reverse, that's trouble. Shlamim, which is the father, label, shenishchatu l'shem toida. He takes a shlamim and he has in mind it's a toida psulim. That's possible. And you'll ask why? What's the difference between the toida for the sake of shlamim, which is okay, and shlamim thinking toida is possible? What's the difference between this and that? The answer is toida is a subset of a shlamim. Kruya shlamim. It's still called a shlamim, which is sort of the father label. So thinking shlamim is not really considered a mislabeling. But not in the reverse. Ve'ein shlamim, but the father category, which is shlamim, is not called. It's not called Korean toida. So thinking toida is called shalei lishma. Continues Rabbah. But apparently, even Rebbe Lezer only considers it a problem if it's shlamim l'shem toida, then it's psula. But let's make an inference. Toida l'shem toida, kshera. If it was really a toida, and he had a mind toida, but the other fellow's toida, it's still okay, because after all, he was thinking the proper name. My love, the chavrei, let's assume, was speaking even if he had in mind the other Torah belonging to the other fellow. Apparently that's not considered a mislabeling. It's not shlei lishma in support of my opinion. Loi, says the Gemara, not necessarily. When he switched Taidas, we say it's okay because the day was speaking that both were his. So the Kohen approached, the carbon Taida, which had been brought for, on the occasion of recovering from a serious illness. Right? There are 4 reasons to bring carbon Taida. Recovering from an illness, released from imprisonment, traveling the seas. So basically, the Kohen switched the purpose, the designation. He thought it was this was for the one for the prison, and really this was the one for the travel. So that's what happened. But after all, both korbanos belong to the same person. So in this case, it's okay. However, in the other case, where he was thinking it's Shimon's korban, really was Reuven's korban, perhaps that's called shinui. Says the more really. So Avos, you mean to say that? But if it's a case of the chavrei, he had in mind the other fellow's toida. What's the halacha psula would be pasul? If that's true, so when the Brisa was looking for a case that's pasul, for a switch which is a problem at the ton, instead of going and finding a case where it was a real drastic switch, it was a shlamim which was l'shem toida, they would say it's psula. Why go that far? You could have cited a more simple, basic confusion, basic mislabeling, and it's pasul as well. Listen, he could have simply cited a case of toida l'shem toida. He shechted Reuven's toida thinking it was Shimon's toida, and as you say, it's pasul. Of course, certainly in the case of a total mislabeling, shlamim, which was l'shem toida, of course it's pasul. If in fact what you're saying is true, the Brisa should have presented that as an example of mislabeling, which is pasul. Well, says the Gemara, no, there was a reason, there was a point, there was a special lesson inherent in the case of the Brisa. Shlamim l'shem toida didei istrichlei. The Brisa wanted to highlight the halacha in a case where he took a shlamim and did a shchita, thinking that it was a toida, of the same person, and teach us that it's pasul. I would think perhaps it's not so simple. You know why? It would be room to think that toida and shlamim are sort of synonymous, interchangeable. It's not really called a mislabeling. It's not really called shlei lishma. Because just like midat toida is also kriya shlamim, sometimes we say toida is called a shlamim, like we said, right? It's the father category. It's not really considered a mislabeling. So I would think it works both ways. Shlamim nami kriya toida. Shlamim at times can be referred to as a toida. And therefore, if he takes a shlamim and thinks toida, l'kashru, accept it. Kamash wanted to point to the Brisa is to say no. Although a toida can sometimes be labeled as shlamim, but not in the reverse. Okay, so bottom line is we have this machlekes. The Kohen approached Reuven's korban toida, did the shchita, thinking it was Shimon's korban toida. So after all, it was just toida. But it was a different person's toida. Is that personal element? Is that critical to the name of the korban? And is it considered a switch? Rabbah says it's still okay. Rav Chizda says it's considered shalei lishma. And each one had a raya to his opinion. Amar Rav, chatas sheshchat l'shem chatas. Right, so actually it was Rabbah who brought a raya, and the Gemara sort of negated it. Okay, Amar Rava, chatas sheshchat l'shem chatas. Suppose a fellow was mafresh 2 korbanos chatas for different sins, for different reasons. One for eating chaylev, one for eating dam. And the Kohen did the shchita on chatas chaylev, thinking it's chatas dam. Ksher, it's okay, it's fully fine. The owner is yaitze. It's not called shlei lishma. After all, he had in mind chatas, even though slightly different variety of a chatas, but after all, it was still chatas. It's not considered mislabeling. L'shem oila, but if he had in mind that it's an oila, then it's psula. It's called shinei kodesh. Shlei lishma, my time of why. How do you know this distinction is correct. Look at the pasuk. V'shachat oisa lachatas. Shechted for the sake of chatas. Amar Achmona, says the Torah. Varei. Chatas, l'shem chatas nishchata. Even if he had in mind different chatas, after all, it's still called chatas. However, l'shem ma'ila, then it's psula. It's considered shini Hashem. V'amar Rabba, another halacha, says Rabba. This time regarding shinoi of baalim, right? Misdesignating the owner. Chatas shechata al mi shemchuyev chatas. He took Reuven's chatas, did the shchita thinking it's Shimon's, and Shimon actually is a fellow who's obligated to bring a chatas. He did something which requires a chatas, so he's a potential chatas owner. So having him in mind presents an interference. He's a competing entity because he also is a potential chatas bringer. So having him in mind is called shinui bailim. Psula the chatas is possible. However, al misham chuyev oila, if he has in mind Shimon, who's not really meant to bring a chatas, he's meant to bring an oila, right? He promised to bring an oila because he violated mitzvah saseh. So he's not really in the chatas ballpark. He's not a potential chatas bringer, so he's not an interfering factor. He's not part of the equation at all. You don't have to reckon with him, and therefore the carbon is ksheira, it's fine. He doesn't really, he's not reckoned with. My time and why? What's the difference? Because the pasuk says v'chiper olav. The carbon has to be processed olav for its owner. Olav on the owner, chaver, not his friend, but only a fellow who is chaver doing the day comparable to this owner. Which means to say, Mchiv Kabar Kamais, he's obligated to bring a kapar like this fellow. So he is a potential chatas bringer, owner, in which case having him in mind creates an interference. But otherwise not. V'amar Rav, another halacha regarding Shinoi Bailim, says Rav, Chatas Sheshchata, Al Mishen Mchiv Klum, listen to this. It was Ruin's chatas. He did the shchita, thinking it was Shimon's, and Shimon, is not committed to any carbon. He doesn't know of any carbon that he has to bring today. Pesula, guess what? The carbon is possible. Because he switched the owner. Shini Bailim. Hold it, what do you mean? The other fellow has to be Mechuyev Chatos to be considered, right? An interference. So why is a fellow who's totally free and unobligated in any carbon? Why do we reckon with him? The answer is she'ein lecha adam Yisrael. There's nobody amongst Klal Yisrael she'ein mechuyev as-sahi. It can't be. There's nobody out there who can claim that he's totally free of any mitzvah asay violation. Amazing. Betel Torah, whatever, right? In which case, he is a potential kapara recipient from a chatas. Why? And therefore, he presents a competing factor here. If you're having him in mind, instead of the right owner, he's going to be threatening, he's competing, he's interfering. V'amar, Rabba told us, chatas mechaberes al chayav yaseh mikal v'chomer, because typically we learn that an oila is mechaper on mitzvahs asehs. Says Rabbi, even a chatas does the same thing. Mikal v'chomer, based on mikal v'chomer, al chayav krisis mechaperes. If a chatas can atone for the most severe sins, the ones that have karis, if done, b'mezid. Certainly al chayav yaseh l'koshkin, of course, on the more lighter sins on mitzvahs aseh that was violated. So basically, even though the fellow doesn't realize, but it relates to karma chatas because of his mitzvahs aseh violations, which the chatas can address as well. So he's considered mechuyev kapara. He's due an atonement. He needs atonement for what he did, which can come from the chatas. So having him in mind, instead of the right owner, well, you have to reckon with him. You have just misdesignated the carbon. You have diverted it to that person who is a potential recipient and beneficiary of this carbon chatas. So in the previous case, we said that having in mind somebody who's chayv to bring an oila, doesn't interfere. Because that's an oila, this is a chatas. Here we say, startingly, if you have in mind somebody who's not chayiv anything, it acts to the detriment of this carbon, because upon violating a mitzvah say, which is inevitable, he can benefit from a chata. So he really is a potential beneficiary of this carbon. Asks the Gemara, how did these two statements jive? Remember the basmina he? So you mean to say that a person who requires a kapara from a chatas because of his mitzvah saseh violations is basmina he, is of the same type? He means to say he relates to this carbon chatas that we have before us, and having him in mind is considered diversion. But a minute ago, Rabbi told us that unless that person is chayiv to bring a chatas, right? Only then is it considered an interference. But if he's bringing a ayla, which is typically what you do for Mrs. Hasei, then he's not considered a player in this equation, in this chatas world. If you took a chatas and shechted it for another person who has to bring a chatas, yeah, it's a diversion. It's a misdesignation. Psula, the carbon is possible. But al mishem mechuyev oila, if he's only chayiv to bring an oila for mitzvah saseh violations, then ksher, the carbon is kosher, it doesn't relate to him. This is a chatas, that's an oila. And here we say that even a fellow who violates mitzvah sasehs can relate to this carbon chatas, and therefore having him in mind is a diversion. Answers the Gemara like this. You're right. The primary function of an oila, as we're going to see later, is it's a doirin, it's a gift. It's a creator of goodwill by Hashem. And its primary function is to sort of cover and address mitzvahs aseh violations, lighter, deviations, lighter sins. That's its main, thrust. Whereas a carbon chatas, its main thrust is to address more severe issues, kares, transgressions. But, sort of, it has a secondary function as well. Residually, it can address even lighter sins, like a mitzvah aseh. Mikiva le'mechapra. Kiva is a lashon of kavua. It primarily is not going to be mechaper on mitzvah saseh, the carbon chat. That's not its main purpose. Mikufya mechaper. Mikufya means floating. It provides a floating sort of secondary, residual, by the way, kapara for mitzvah saseh as well. So, again, if a fellow out there is chayiv to bring an oila, he promised to bring an oila for his mitzvah saseh, and you take this chatas and you have him in mind, it's not an issue. Because you're already committed to his oila, which is going to be addressing his mitzvah saseh. So his carbon oila is directed at his mitzvah saseh. He's no longer in need of a proper atonement for mitzvah saseh. He already has his oila on the agenda. So in which case, diverting this chatas to him is a non-diversion. He doesn't relate to this chatas. He's already covered by his oila, whose primary function is to address his issues. That's not called shini baila. He doesn't relate to this. He's not reckoned with this in this equation. But in the second story, where a fellow had not yet committed to bring an oila, he's just walking the street without any commitments. And he has mitzvah sasehs, we're assuming everybody does, that have to be addressed. So, at the least, he's going to, benefit from a chatas. He could benefit from a chatas that can at least partially address his mitzvah sasehs. So, technically, he's considered a bar kapara, which means to say he's a potential beneficiary and recipient of the kapara of this chatas before us. So, having him in mind is called a deviation, a diversion, a misdesignation. And therefore, it's called Shloi Shmon Pasuk. Amazing. Back to the classic, where he had an oila, he did the shchita Shloi Shmon. Also, Lizrak Dom Shloi Shmon. You can't just say, if I found it's lost, I'll do the Zrika Shloi Shmon. No. Just because you did one thing wrong, doesn't justify further deviation. Get back on track and conclude the carbon properly. Iboy Yisem Akra, Iboy Yisem Asvara. either from a pasuk or simple logic. Is it from a pasuk? Moitzes zachat tishmer, like we had back on Daf Beis. The carbon should be processed properly, and even if not, and it loses some of its potency, but you have to culminate the process as good as you could. Or it can be simple logic. But just because he deviated once doesn't justify further deviation. The Reish Pirkas went back in the beginning of the parak. Another halacha. You have a carbon oila whose owner died. You're going to proceed and bring it as a carbon. So if you switch the label of the carbon is pasul. Which means to say it doesn't count on their record, and the inheritor, the Yerush, has to bring another one. But if he switched the owner, instead of thinking about the person who had owned the carbon and passed away, he's thinking Shimon, it doesn't affect the carbon whatsoever. There's no concept of ownership after death, so it's not considered a deviation. Rav Pinchas, Rav Ami Amar, he disagrees. Even after death, the original owner who had passed away is still considered the actual owner, which doesn't allow for deviation. Amalei Rav Ashi, Rav Pinchas, Rav Ami. He had a question. When you say Yesh Baalam Lachar Misa, what do you mean to say? So Rashi learns, by the way, Yesh Baalam Lachar Misa means Shayerish Hu Baaleh, right? Hayerish, the inheritor, the Yerish is considered the owner. In which case, it doesn't allow for switching owners, right? So although it was initially presented by their father, now the father is no longer with us, but the son sort of takes over. He becomes the actual owner, and Yesh Baalam Lachar Misa. No, even after death, there's still an owner. Rashi says, who's the owner? The Yerush, the kid. Shayerish Hu Baaleh. So you can't mislabel the owner here. Amalei Rav Ashi, he turned to Rav Pinchas, Rav Ami. You say that the child is the new owner? To what extent? Dafka kamar mar? Do you mean actually, all the way? Yesh Baalam Lachar Misa. That the child is now the new owner. And let's say it was done shaloi lishma. So, do you mean to say that the child now has to bring a new carbon? Right? Because he's obligated to bring this carbon. He's the new owner. Full obligation. If it wasn't done properly, he has to bring another one. Do you mean to that extent? He has to bring another one to make up? Or do you mean to say that he just benefits from the carbon? The iko, kama, asay gabei, if he has some asay violations on his record, the carbon will address it as though he's the owner. Up to that point. Doesn't mean to say that he's fully responsible and has to replace the carbon. If Amalei Dafka Kamina, he says, I meant actually what I said. To that extent, yeah. He's the new owner, and if anything happens, he would have to replace it, just like the original owner would have that obligation. V'amarava, oila doirni. You should know that a carbon oila is merely a gift. Rashi explains, about 15 lines from the top, he says, oila doirni, says Rashi, eina bo l'chaper, alasei kapara mamish. The oila is not a kapara carbon. Ela achasha kipra tshuva alasei. He bo lak balas panim. It's a 1-2 step process. First, the person does the tshuva on Mrs. Asay, and then the carbon oil comes to sort of, evoke goodwill. Ka'adam shesarach b'melech, like a person who got in trouble with the king. V'ritzeyu adei parklitin. He first, appeased the king with, some appeasers. Ukshabala hagul pana, when he came to finally, meet the king, maybe there and beyond he brings a sort of a gift, a goodwill gesture. And that's what the carbon oil does. But it's not really a kapara carbon, it's just sort of an appeaser after the tshuva. Asks the Gemara Chidami, what would you think? That it's for kapara? That the oil brings kapara? He did like a tshuva. What happened? Did the fellow do teshuva? or did he not do teshuvah? If he didn't do teshuvah, there's nothing to talk about. Zevach Roshaim Te'eva. The carbon of a Rosh is Te'eva, disgusting, right? There will be no room for a carbon if there's no teshuvah. So you can't say the Oila will be mechaper without teshuvah. V'yidik teshuvah, on the other hand, if he did teshuvah, then what's the point of bringing a carbon? Hatani, we learned in a brayse back in Maseches Yuma, Avram mitzvahs aseh v'shav. Right? A person violated mitzvah say, and he did teshuvah. That's it. Takes care of it instantly. Lo yizaz misham ad shemoichlin loy. He doesn't leave until he gets mechila. Means to say it's instant mechila. You don't really need a carbon oila to be mechaper. So this is all Rava speaking. Right? I'll prove to you that an oila is a doiron, because it can't be more than that. It can't be for kapara. If there's no teshuvah, the carbon is not going to be mechaper. If there is teshuvah, you don't need a kapara. The only thing that's left is a doiron. It's a gift, a gesture of goodwill. Tanam Yehachu, we find the same in the brayse. Amar Shimon, he had a question. Chatas lama ba. What's the point of bringing a carbon chatas? Asks the Gemara, what do you mean? We know why it's lama ba. What do you mean why is it? The Chab is coming to atone for a serious sin. No, he meant to say like this. Lama ba lefnei oila. Why do we find that a chatas, when you bring a chatas in oila, the chatas always comes before the oila, like we had back in the end of Hiriyos. Why in that order? Lefraklit shenichnas. It's analogous to a story of the king, right? So he got into trouble and he brings a praklit, sort of an advocate, right, to come into the king first. Shenichnas. He goes to the king, he appeases him, he calms him down, right? Takes care of the crux of the issue. That's the chatas. Once that's taken care of, ritza, praklit. Once the praklit is meratza, nichnas there and achrav, now you come with a gift to smooth things out and warm things up again. So that's the point of the oila, which is the gift, after the chatas, which is the kapara. Ritza praklit, nichnas there and achrav. Okay, so up until now we spoke about Shini Hashem and the carbon, Shini Bailim. For the most part, the carbon is still kosher, but we have exceptions. Pesach and Chatas. Those two carbonas are exceptional. If there's any deviation, they are completely puzzle. Completely puzzle. Chutz from Pesach and Chatas, how do I know? Pesach, Minolan, how do we know that by carbon Pesach? The Lishma is critical. The Pasuk says, Shomer es chodesh aviv vasisa Pesach. Make it as a Pesach. First, we'll explain it's an extra pasuk to teach us sheyu kol asiyos l'shem Pesach. All its doings must be for the sake of Pesach only. Ashchon shinu kodesh. That tells us you can't deviate on the name of the carbon. Shinu b'alav. What about switching the owner? We have another pasuk. V'amartem zevach Pesach hu. Make it for a Pesach. The shechita has to be for the sake of Pesach and nothing else. Now it's an unnecessarily pasuk. We already know you have to maintain the name of the carbon from the previous pasuk. That's the rule. When we have an actual pasuk, we find an address where it's needed. If it's not needed, it's instruct regarding switching the name of the carbon itself. That we already know from the previous pasuk that it's not allowed. Apply it to switching the owner, and we see that's important as well. Ashkol and mitzvah. You've presented sources that it's required. It's a mitzvah to have the right thing in mind. But we're looking for further than that. La'akev minol. How do we know that it's critical for the kashrus of the carbon? Amar Kro, we have another pasuk. V'zavachta Pesach Hashem lekech. The zvich has to be for Pesach. So yeah, if it's an unnecessary pasuk, extra pasuk, apparently this repetition is indicating that it's ma'akiv, it's critical, it's vital. Any sh'legishma is pas. Maskevler Rav Safra had a question on this. Hi v'zavachta. This pasuk of v'zavachta just quoted, lochid also is coming for this din of the shma. It's for something else. It's needed for a different halacha. Rav Nachman, don't Rachman Ravua. Menayin l'meiser Pesach. How do we know that the leftover carbon Pesach? Suppose he had a carbon Pesach, got lost. He designated a backup, then he found the other one. Leftover, unneeded carbon Pesach. What happens to it? Shekarev shlamim. You bring it as a shlam. How do we know? If you bring a Pesach from tzayin, which is the light animals, the sheep, the goats, ubakar, and from heavy animals. And we all know from the psukim back in Parshas Boi that a korban Pesach only comes from light animals. Well, Pesach comes from sheep and goats, not bakar. Oh, the pasuk here is teaching us a new halacha. Sometimes a Pesach, which really comes only from tzayin, can be converted into a shlamim, which typically comes even from heavy animals. When is that? When the korban Pesach is leftover, unneeded. Mikan Pesach, we learn from it that a Moser Pesach, a leftover korban Pesach, which is unneeded, Sheila Dover, which is now diverted into something else, a shlamim, turns into a shlamim, Dover Abba, which is sourced from Minatzoyim and Abak. Remind you, who's that korban? This new korban shlamim, which comes from either tzayin or from bakar. So the pasuk is teaching us that a korban Pesach sometimes can convert into a shlamim. So it's needed for that halacha. It's unavailable to teach us the din of la'akev v'shelo lishma. Elam Rav Safra. You're right. This pasuk of Zevachim Pesach is needed for this halacha. Look at the Rav Nachman. The pasuk of Shomer es Chodesh Aviv v'asisa Pesach, which is the pasuk we had before. That's coming to tell you, don't switch the name of the korban itself. It's a mitzvah to keep and not switch the label of the korban itself. The next pasuk we had before, Pesach, B'shini Bailam mitzvah, is coming to tell you, don't switch the owner. Shini Bailam, it's a mitzvah to keep the right designation in terms of the owner. But there's an extra word. Who? For Maritim Zevach Pesach. Who is an emphasis to tell you these things are critical. La'akiv bein hacha v'hacha. Whether we switch the korban or switch the owner, it's me'akiv, it's vital, it's critical. Va'ashkan zvicha. Okay, so that's the pasuk by shchita. So you know shchita it's critical. Sharvoides minol. What about the other steps of the avodah? The Kabbalah of the dam, the ilacha, the zrik. How do we know? It applies there as well. Hoyel v'gali gali. Once the Torah reveals, indicates these things are important and critical. Although it's only mentioned by the Zvicha, we assume it applies to the other steps of the Avodah as well. Hence we know whether it's Shloi L'Shmai in the korban or Shloi L'Shmai in the owner. When it comes to korban Pesach, any deviation is possible completely, whether it's the Shechita, the Kabbalah, the Acha, the Zrika. Rav Ashi Amar says no. Hoyel v'gali gali. This point that once we know here, we know it there. We don't say that. We need explicit instructions. So back to the question. Allah avodas minol. How do we know that this is critical by the other steps of the avodah aside from shechita? The answer is like this. We connect it. We connect the Pesach to the korban shlamim, just like by the korban shlamim. There is a requirement of lishma. In all korbanos you have to do lishma. Pesach has an added element of criticality. It's me'akev. But just like by the shlamim, there is a mitzvah to do lishma by all four avodas. There's no differentiation between the shechita and the zrik, right? So we see it's universal. It's all encompassing. Whatever is required applies to all four steps equally. Likewise, by the korban Pesach. Once we establish that it's ma'akev by shechita, we assume the same applies to all four avodas. The pasuk says, "Zayis ha'Torah la'ilav lamincha." And it mentions the shlamim in that pasuk. V'tanya, and in the following pasuk, it says, "B'yem tzavoi says b'nei Yisrael lahakar is korbaneim." Korbaneim is referring to other korbanos. What's that? So b'chor u'maser Pesach, referring to the b'chor korban, the maser, behema korban, and the korban Pesach. Hence, korban Pesach is mentioned in the same context as all the other korbanos and connected to the shlamim as well. By doing so, the Torah is connecting to the shlamim, teaching us ma shlamim, just like the shlamim. It's universal. Its requirements are all-encompassing. Bein shini kodesh, bein shini bailam, whether switching the name of the korban or the owner, bein the mitzvah is required. It's a mitzvah to do so, and it applies to all the avodas of the shlamim. Avkor, likewise, all the other korbanos, including Pesach. Bein shini kodesh, bein shini bailam, the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to have the right thing in mind, the right korban, the right owner. So now, the baseline has been established. So those extra psukim that we had by the korban Pesach, Vasisa Pesach. Vamartim Zevach Pesach. It's teaching us another layer of obligation here. That a Korban Pesach is held to a higher standard. So from the Pasuk Vasisa Pesach we learn all steps of the Hakrava have to be done for the sake of Pesach. And it's Miyakav, because it's a repetition. The baseline we learn from Shlomim. Vasisa Pesach is that repetition to tell you it's Miyakav. Likewise, Vamartim Zevach Pesach is coming to tell you that the Zvicha, the Shchita, must be done with the right owner in mind. But last remaining question was, what about the other three steps of the Avodah? How do we know changing the owner is critical? Uka Shlomim. Once again, we connect it to Shlomim. Where we see there's no differentiation between this or that. It's all one package. Ma Shlomim, just like by the Shlomim, Ben Zvicha, Ben Shar Avodah, whether it's the Shchita or the other steps. Lo Yichilakt Ben L'Mitzvah. There's no difference. There's a mitzvah to do Lishma on all steps. Av Pesach, likewise by the Pesach. In its own world, where it's critical, it's all encompassing. Once again, we don't differentiate between Zvicha and the other steps of the Avodah. Just like it's critical by the Zvicha, it's critical by the other steps, and it's Mi'akev. One last question is, Elahu. If you recall, we had the word hu, which was an extra word. According to this, it's extra. Normally, what's it for? The answer is coming for something else, totally different. Because Sanya, Nemer Pesachu b'shchita le'akoiv, we find that the Torah cites the word hu by the shchita of the Pesach, where in fact switching and doing Shlei Lishma is critical. Aval Asham, but as opposed to the Korban Asham, where it's not so. Le'nemer by hu, although it says the word hu as well, which sounds like it's critical, but it only says it after they burnt the fats, and even the burning of the fats is not critical. So how could you say that the Torah is telling you that deviation by the asham is critical, if it's sort of linked to the burning of the fats, which in itself are not critical? The asham itself, even without burning the fats, it's supposed to be done, but if it wasn't done, it's kosher. So you can't say that Shlei Lishma is possible, as opposed to the Pesach, where the hu is written by the Shechita, where in fact it is Ma'akiv. So the Pesach is highlighting the difference, that Asham doesn't have the same standards as Korban Pesach. Okay, so in a nutshell, we had discussion about various instances of Shlei Lishma. We started with Toida L'Shem Toida, but it was the wrong owner. So it was this fellow's Toida, it was really his Toida. Rabbi said it's still perfectly fine, because after all, there was no real switch. He still had a Toida in mind. Rav Chizah says, it's the wrong Toida, it's possible. Rabbi teaches us about a Chatas, where he had in mind the other Chatas, it's still okay. If he had in mind an Oila, it's possible. If he had in mind the other owner, who's chayav to bring a Chatas, that's an interference. Or if the other fellow is chayav to bring an Oila, it's not an interference. But if chayav nothing, he hadn't yet promised to bring anything, then he's still potential. He becomes a potential recipient of this Chatas, which also addresses mitzvahs essays, which pretty much everybody has on their record. That's called a deviating element. It's called deviation, diversion. He's a potential beneficiary. It's called Shini Bailam. We learned that just because he did the Shechita Shlei Lishma, he should never continue Shlei Lishma. Rather, he has to get back on track and do it properly. We spoke about Oila after Misa. Rabbi says Shini Bailam doesn't apply. Rav Pinchas Beider Ami says it does. We define the functions of the Chatas, which is for Kapara, and the Oila, which is a gift. And that's why it addresses mitzvahs essays as well, but not at its primary, function. It's more like a gift, which, by circumstance, so to speak, appeases and cleans the slate. And we have the sourcings for the Shlei Lishma by the Korban Pesach being ma'akev in the kashrus of the korban. All the best to you and Hatzlacha.